Are you ready for a Freaky Friday session?
Man, I'm ready to go. I have my TherapyBites trackpad with me. That's what my little mouse goes on. And I'm ready to talk about some things from Freaky Friday, which actually, right after this, we're going to do a full hour show, really digging more into what we're about to talk about, which is phantoms in the brain. So for
Mm.
Freaky Friday, we're talking about all the weird things that the human brain does and the fact that we can really decatastrophize psychopathology and mental illness and ask ourselves the question, what's really going on there? And so I have a few stories for you guys today, and I look forward to digging into that about just some of the freaky things that the human brain does, and not just those with psychopathology, but we can learn what all of our brains do in the background, kind of like the wizard behind the curtain on The Wizard of Oz. So I look forward to digging into that, Johnny. I've got my
I'm
tea. I'm ready
I'm
to go.
I'm looking forward to it too, because some of the topics that we're gonna discuss personally affect me and personally affect other people, because everybody has been affected by these things. So I'm a talkative person. I make friends easily. I love to get to know people, warts and all. And a lot of folks can tell straight away that I'm someone they can tell their issues to, and so I often become a proverbial and literal shoulder to cry on. One of the things I've realized with experience is that people's issues are pretty nuanced and aren't always debilitating. Can you describe some of the benefits of having strange brains and mental illness?
I have a surprise for your viewers at the end of our conversation about that very thing. So thank you for bringing it up. But I'll give you just a bit of a taste test for what we're going to get to here in about, 10 or 11 minutes. So hang on, and we're going to dig into what Johnny just said, which is really this, that perhaps in your brain viewer, we are all just Sims. We're all figments of your imagination. It's a type of psychological solipsism where really everybody else, you think they're there, but they're really not. You're just creating all of this reality in your brain, and how people really program their brains to believe just that. But let me share a few things with you. One is, and a couple of these are from books that I've read and case studies that I've had from neuropsychology, neurology, neuroscience. And one of the most interesting is the case of Dr. P, who was known as the man who mistook his wife for a hat. And he suffered from visual agnosia. So agnosia means absence of knowledge or ignorance of. And so Dr. P, he was a music teacher, and he developed a syndrome where he could not recognize faces, objects, differentiating one from the other. And strangely, he kept on mistaking his wife for a hat. His perception was so fragmented that although all of his other cognitive functions were intact, he kept trying to put his wife on his head, thinking that she was his hat. And so what we can learn from this is that all of our brains view experience as a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. And the focus of living is getting really, really good at taking this piece and fitting all the pieces together. So I would challenge viewers and listeners to understand that all of our brains have the tendency to miss things. And the key is to slow down, take a look around, realize our brains do not operate without imperfections. And moment by moment, if we take a breath, then our brains can more fully and expertly assimilate our experience so that we don't miss things.
That is amazing, and I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I kind of wonder then, if the things we're going to discuss is just a case that people could maybe rewire their mind or retrain their mind to take the time to actually see these things. I'm not sure if that's possible with some of this. So we're going to discuss three things in particular, three ailments, you could say, of the mind. And one of them is something that's very interesting to me is narcissism. Now, I was in a relationship with someone who I believe was not a narcissist, and many people have felt like that. Lots of people see narcissism as the other side of like the other side of the coin to being an empath or empathic, and that they're dancing between each other all of the time. And that some people have like all of one, and some people have all of the other, and most people are a mixture of the two. And my experience was a devastating experience. And at one point, I was told, that by this person that they couldn't feel any emotion for anybody, not even like the people they're supposed to be closest to. And I couldn't mentally unwrap that. I couldn't even understand what that meant. So why shouldn't narcissism absolutely terrify the more empathic amongst us?
Well, that's a great question, and I've got a really strange case that I think fits right with that, and it's about a man named John Sharon. And the only reason I can say these names is because these people have volunteered to have their stories told, and they weren't my patients; they're just heavily written about in the literature out there. And John suffered from what is called Cotard syndrome. It's also called walking corpse syndrome, and so John believed that he was dead. So, despite being actually alive and physically healthy, this condition was linked, strangely, I would say that, to a disconnection from different brain regions that are aware of the body, of bodily functions. For instance, you may not be aware that you're breathing right now, but if you bring your attention to the breath, you will realize that breathing is occurring, heartbeat is occurring. I've already mentioned respiration. As I sit here, if I pay attention, I can feel a slight, not breeze, but the presence of air on the back of my right hand and my right arm. And if you take time to think, you may be able to become aware of that on your right arm or your left arm or your face. You see, the brain is tracking all of these things in real time, but it subliminates it to different levels of conscious and unconscious experience. But here's the key. As humans, we get better and better and better at this, what is called interoceptive. So I encourage you to enter into your life with interoception. Literally spend time being aware, practicing awareness. What do I notice at the back of my neck? What do I notice on the back of my hand? What is the taste that I recognize in my mouth? And then becoming more aware of ourselves really helps us become more aware of others. And again, it's really like putting these jigsaw puzzle pieces together along with what we're going to talk about in a moment, which I mentioned was psychological solipsism. You've never heard that term before because I made that up. I just thought the words fit together nicely. And solipsism is the belief that you're the only person that exists in your universe. So really, if you pay attention and you compare the jigsaw puzzle analogy I've mentioned, Cotard syndrome or walking corpse syndrome, and then the psychological solipsism, I think it really very well answers Johnny's question. If we think about it, what do we do about people that seem to have what we call narcissism? What's going on with them? Is it about them? Is it about me? Is it something that they can't get over? Johnny, you mentioned that earlier when you talked about can the brain really be reprogrammed? But I want to go on to one more here that is called Capgras delusion. One of my favorites. I first heard about this in the late 80s during undergraduate school. And this is based on a case study of an unfortunate gentleman named David. And David believed, get this, David believed that his parents were imposters. He believed that some being had imprisoned his parents somewhere. These were not his parents. They looked like his parents, walked like his parents, talked like his parents. Even though he recognized them visually, there was some disconnection between his visual recognition of them and other data that his brain simply wasn't able to access. And so let me take the narcissism thing that you hear so much about on social media. What this is an inability of that person to put all the pieces together such that they're not the only person in their universe, that you, me, Johnny are real people also that have wants and needs and wishes and hurts, habits, and hangups. And so all these pathways that equate to that kind of conclusion that you, that is you, is just like the me that is me and experiences pain and suffering and troubles and trials and tribulations is really a very complex mechanism in the brain. But the good news is that we can use therapeutic approaches that help the person get better and better and better at recognizing the other person as a other person, not just as an it. So it's really deep education, deep into the recesses, the dark recesses. You know, there's no light in the brain, into the dark recesses of the brain itself, helping things connect and communicate in that person's brain like it connects and communicates in your own. When you recognize me as a person, and you recognize that maybe in this situation, I have a need that needs to be addressed before your needs need to be addressed, kind of a mental triage, then that's something that the brain can carry out and get better and better at over time.
That is a brilliant way to put it, but it also leaves me with loads of questions of how you would possibly get a narcissist to understand properly, mentally embedded within that sort of paradigm, how you'd get them to actually go and find help or seek help. And I think that would be one of the main problems, is actually getting them to recognize their own inability to perceive others as being emotional creatures. But going on, psychopathy. Have fictional characters such as Norman Bates given psychopaths a bad rap? And what are the potential benefits to psychopathy?
Well, really psychopaths, once identified as, not all psychopaths are criminals, and of course not all criminals are psychopaths. It's two very, very different things. And so the thing that happens with people diagnosed with it who are also criminals, they kind of become expert lifelong patients. And so in studying them and what they lack gives us better insight into what we have and how we think about the world and how we really humanize people. And one thing I want to point out is all these terms I'm coming up with, I said there's a term I made up. Psychological solipsism. Now, you've heard of psychological. Most people have not heard of solipsism. I've simply put the two words together, kind of a portmanteau phrase. All of these words are made up. The brain really doesn't care what you call it. These processes are really just extremes of normal processes that we all have. I'll give an example. Surgeons, when a surgeon is cutting into a human body and has a trocar or something, spreading ribs apart, cutting through flesh and bone, in order to operate, and I'm not, kind of no pun intended, in order to operate and be effective in that situation, they really do have to call on some of the same shutting down of mental processes that a psychopath does so well at shutting down, because they cannot sit there and look at that as a human body of, say, their son or their daughter and do a good job at it. And it's probably no surprise that people that rate highest in psychopathy tend to be who? Surgeons. But also, and this is no surprise also, politicians. Because a politician, let's just take Eisenhower and Truman, how would they make a decision to send millions of men into battle, knowing that they were the sons and daughters of people just like him, and pass down the order to drop a bomb that literally incinerated thousands and thousands of people? So people, to function in certain areas, have to be able to turn on and turn off certain areas. And studying psychopathy helps us understand what those areas are.
There was one more because we were going to talk about schizophrenia, but we've got literally about 30 seconds, which would make anybody schizophrenic or any answer schizophrenic. But surely the benefits are slim to being schizophrenic.
Well, I don't know, not so much. I found that people that have schizophrenia come to deal with it like anybody would any kind of thing that impairs functional status. And some people, after many, many years, if asked to give it up, they in fact wouldn't give it up. When they're offered medications that reduce symptoms, they tend not to want the medications. But here's the quick thing on psychological solipsism. As you're listening to me, there's a part of your brain right over here and right over here that is listening to me. And so we can get better and better and better at humanizing people and train our brains to become better listening by stopping and giving space a chance to hear their voice and to hear what they have to say. We're literally reminding ourselves that we're not the only person in the universe, that I have a voice, Johnny has a voice, you have a voice, and we can train our brains to get better at humanizing other people. Thank you so much, Johnny.